Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and welcome to episode 109, The Strange Case of Richard Lupin. And this was going to be part 1, by the way. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And here we go. Richard Lupin, a short man with a small but extraordinarily sharp nose, simple oval glasses, brown hair which was balding prematurely, and who was thin, but with the look of a man who's thin because he rarely bothers to eat, entered his office at the local auto dealer. He carried a small case, which in any previous decade would have been called a briefcase, and put it down next to the desk while he took off his coat and hung it on the hook which protruded from the back of the door, which he shut. He then spent nearly the entirety of the day at his desk in that office, leaving only for 2 restroom breaks and a lunch break. Outside the office, people came and went. All of the other people were extremely outgoing, as they had to be to sell cars. But they had all learned to talk as little as possible to Richard Lupin, the accountant in the office. When they needed something from him, they messaged him or emailed him, or if it was urgent, called him on his phone. One of his main jobs was to make sure the paperwork went through on all the car loans, and as there were many sales each day, he was always working. At the end of the day, he locked his desk and the file cabinets, picked up his case, locked the office behind him, and headed for his car. It was a day for him like any other. But the next day, after lunch, he started to feel a strange sensation deep in him. In his bones, he thought. It ached. Then it hurt. When it was approaching his time to clock out, the pain was becoming sharp. He decided to push through it. Natalie, the receptionist, happened to be outside in the hall when she heard a sharp hiss coming from inside Richard Lupin's office. She decided not to investigate. She figured he had stubbed his toe or spilled hot coffee on himself. But no, it was the sharp in-breath one takes when they have felt a quick, stabbing pain. The last hour or so of his time at work was excruciating. He tried to work through it, but got very little done. In the end, when 5 o'clock came, he didn't lock his desk or filing cabinets at all, and barely managed to lock his office door. He stumbled to his car. Maybe the pain was passing, or maybe he was getting a psychological reprieve since he would be able to head home. In any case, the pain lessened a little, and he was able to drive home. His home was as quiet and clean as he could make it, and he appreciated it all the more this day. He entered via the man door in the garage, uncharacteristically dropping his case in the mudroom. He stumbled upstairs and down the hall to his bedroom and tore his clothes off, accepting only his underwear, not caring to put them in the correct laundry baskets. He grabbed a couple of ibuprofen from a rather old bottle, swallowed them with a swig of water from the sink, and then collapsed into bed. The pain came rolling in waves. He was just on the point of figuring out where the nearest urgent care center was when it started to subside. He sighed in relief, and he was so exhausted from the ordeal that he fell into a deep sleep. Later that night, he woke up, unable to move. This briefly scared him, but then he remembered the other times that he had woken up in a sort of sleep paralysis. Then he noted that the pain had gone from his bones, and was glad. After a while, however, it was clear he wasn't going to be able to move, and fear began slowly to grip him again. He desperately tried to wiggle even a finger or toe, but was unable to. He happened to be facing the ceiling, and though he could move his eyes around a little, he couldn't move his neck at all. He felt his muscles start to contract, to cramp painfully, and though he still couldn't move them, they all began to hurt. His body, muscles tensing on both sides, curled a bit, and his head rolled up and down sickeningly. The pain was becoming unbearable. He never knew exactly how long he was like this, body out of control, muscles cramping, pain shooting through his body, wondering if he would somehow break bones or tear ligaments in his uncontrolled frenzy. It was clearly some hours later, however, because eventually the sky started to change color and a bit of light crept into his room. Even as his muscle cramps died down, he fell back asleep, exhausted. Later, he woke up. His muscles did not hurt. However, he was unable to move. It was most strange. It wasn't like he was not in control of his muscles. They obeyed, or tried to. However, though he could feel his body straining, he wasn't able to move at all. Despite this, he could feel his muscles flexing, but they had no effect. It was as though his skin had turned into a hard plastic shell with him trapped inside. Perhaps worst of all, his breathing felt shallow, and he felt as though he were constantly running out of oxygen. He was still more or less on his back, but with his body rigid, at least on the outside, he couldn't move. He knew he must already be late for work. The sun was streaming in through the window. He fell asleep again. His inability to move eventually forced his mind to shut down. When he awoke, he could move. It was almost as though he were back to normal, except his muscles were still aching from being forced hours ago to push themselves so hard. After a moment's relieved enjoyment of moving his hands and arms around, he started. He ran downstairs, back to his case, and took his phone from the outside pocket of his case. Any other day he would have brought it up to his room, but not last night. He activated it. It was 10:30. There were multiple messages on it. He called the office and got Natalie. She put him through to Bill Barnes, the manager. Richard stammered through an apology he wouldn't remember later, roughly saying he had been extremely ill last night and ended up exhausted and oversleeping. He also assured Mr. Barnes that he would see a doctor, as indeed he intended to. After answering a few short questions about what work needed to be done, Richard hung up and looked at his phone, miserable. What the hell had happened to him last night? It wasn't until that moment that he realized he was naked. While walking back to his bedroom, he called and was fortunate in that his doctor, Dr. Kudley, had an opening and would be able to see him in the early afternoon. He was also fortunate in that that was a short call, because by the end of it he was already staring in shock at his bed. His sheets, and indeed the top portion of his expensive mattress, were in shreds. His underwear was only vaguely discernible because of the torn waistband lying half off of the bed. He turned and went to his bathroom. He very closely and very carefully looked at himself in the mirror. There was no real evidence of damage, though he had dark circles under his eyes from a truly bad night's sleep. He then looked at his skin directly, close up. Nothing, no bruising, nothing that would indicate what caused the massive pain. He ordered a new mattress online, flipped his shredded one upside down, and put his second set of sheets on it. Then he set an alarm on his phone and went to sleep, and slept deeply until it was time to go see his doctor. And that's where we're going to end the story for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions about this episode, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thank you for listening. Words and music, copyright 2019, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.